We'll move on then to Prop 33.
Great. Good evening. The essential question in Prop 33 is the scope of local rent control laws that should be allowed under state law. State law now currently allows municipalities to enact local rent control rules, but there are certain parameters that state law puts in place that limit the scope of those rules. There's three main limitations under current law. The first is that local rent control cannot apply to any single-family homes. The second is that it can only apply to older homes. It can't apply to anything built after 1995. And the third is that these local rent control rules must allow for so-called vacancy decontrol, and this essentially means they can only dictate how much a landlord can increase rents for an existing tenant. They can't say how much they can increase the rent when a new tenant moves in. So Prop 33 would essentially repeal that existing state law that puts these three limitations in place in its entirety. This would mean there would be no state restrictions on the type or scope of local rent control rules. Prop 33 in and of itself wouldn't make any changes to local rent control rules, but we think it is likely that at least some municipalities would use this new authority to expand the scope of their local rent control laws. An expansion of local rent control could have a variety of economic effects, and I'll summarize them by talking about kind of effects on three categories of individuals. The first are some portion of renters that would gain access to additional units of rent-controlled housing. And for those renters, they would receive a financial benefit largely in the form of lower rents than they would otherwise pay. Other renters, though, who do not gain access to rent control, and this would likely represent the majority of renters in the state, barring a significant expansion of local rent control as it stands today. For those renters, they likely would face both some increase in the rents that they pay and a decrease in the availability of rentals, making it possibly harder for them to find a home to rent. The third group of individuals is landlords, who would likely see a decrease in their incomes and also probably a decrease in the value of their rental properties. The primary fiscal effect that we estimate from the measure flows from this last piece, and it's that with the value of rental properties likely declining, we think that property taxes going to local governments would decline by at least tens of millions of dollars per year.
All right, so this is related to the next measure in that the AIDS Healthcare Foundation funded this and put most of the money behind getting it on the ballot, but also the advertising afterwards. They get federal reduced drug prices in order to serve their clientele, but some of that money has been used this time and in several recent elections on funding measures related to housing. And so this is one, there was one in 2018, I believe, and we've had several in recent years that have failed. So that it's on the ballot again. So in support, AIDS Healthcare Foundation, California Democratic Party, Veterans Voices, the Nurses Association, the Alliance for Retired Americans, Housing is a Human Right, Tenants Together, et cetera. So it's housing groups. In opposition, it's mostly renters groups and the Chamber of Commerce, some Republicans, Senator Tony Atkins, though, and Buffy Wicks, those are Democrats, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And then there are no newspapers in support of this, but there are multiple newspapers in opposition. And I encourage you to read those, look them up if you want more details on the reasoning on these things. So the AIDS Healthcare Foundation put most of the money towards this. So, 540, my glasses, I'm getting it to that age, 549 million. And then in opposition, we've got apartment associations, associations of realtors, essentially organizations that would be impacted by the rent control. So the funding, we have for and against. The against is 92 million, almost, a little over, and 49 million that are for, so there's quite a bit more raised against this measure. What questions do you have on Prop 33?
Hi, Hi, thank you. I actually just signed, we're moving into a house in a few weeks, and I just signed a clause saying like the single family home I'm moving into to rent is not rent control, is like not fall into the protection of rent control. And I thought like, oh, bummer. They're gonna, when this lease is up, they're just gonna like gouge me. And I remember thinking like, oh, I would want that. But did you say that the effect on low income folks would be, I didn't quite catch what you said on how it would impact folks who are low income and who might need to move. It would make it harder for them to move and acquire housing?
Yeah, sorry. Let me try to summarize a few of the things that I said again. One is that Prop 33 passing wouldn't immediately make any changes to any of those kind of local rent control rules. So it would require, cities to take future action. Cities, both elected officials and voters, take future actions to expand those rules. So, for example, if in the future the city of Sacramento, after Prop 33 passed, they would have the authority to then maybe go ahead and pass a rent control that does apply to single-family homes. The distinction that I was making about how this could have sort of disparate effects on renters is that that there would be, even with expansion of local rent control rules, it's only a minority of cities now that have some sort of rent control in the state. The vast majority don't. Probably, that number would increase, but there would still be some number of rent controlled units and probably a majority of rentals that aren't covered by rent control. And so it would sort of have disparate effects on renters. Those who essentially were able to access those rent controlled units that are sort of in limited supply, right? There wouldn't be enough for everyone. So those who were able to get into one of those, they would financially benefit from this expansion. But the folks who don't gain access to rent control and they're renting from a unit that isn't covered, probably the rents could end up being somewhat higher for those. And in part because one effect of rent control can be for sort of the supply of rental housing to decline. And the primary driver of that is that some landlords essentially just decide to get out of the business of renting. They might, sell it to someone who's going to own it and live there, or turn it into an Airbnb or whatever. So it can reduce the number of rentals. That can make it harder for the folks who didn't get in a rent controlled unit to find something, and make it more expensive for them.
Thank you.
Other questions on this one? All right, let's move on.